He's my son. He's my son. From the in-laws' place. Yes, we need justice. Justice marriage in the we are going to Tororo is the battleground.
Bob Kasango has never been a Mtoro. Has never been a Mtoro. He's a job, he has a home, he has father.
I didn't have an idea of the time. The family of Bob Kasango, his mother, his aunties and uncles, his dear wife, Nice, and the kids, Samora, Steffi, and Ivana, and fellow mourners. I have written my testimony of Bob already, which you can go and read online, and since we don't have time, I will say perhaps a few things about Bob. I feel great pain that Bob has died at the age he died. And I feel pain that Bob died alone and lonely in a small sick bay inside Luzira prison. Bob didn't have to die at this time, and Bob did not need to die in prison. Bob initially was identified with a critical medical condition, heart condition. He had a hole in his heart. The name Nice will tell it. And was recommended by the best doctors in Uganda to go abroad for medical attention. We organized resources, and he was about to leave, but his passport had been at that time confiscated by the government because of the charges he was facing. The charges, which were, at a better table we can explain, were really spurious. The judiciary, the DPP, and the judges rejected his appeal, and they claimed that Bob was faking his illness. At this time, he was actually on oxygen in a hospital. Then, to add insult to injury, Bob's bail was cancelled arbitrarily, and then he was convicted unfairly and unjustly, and his appeal for bail, while pending appeal, was itself not approved. I cannot understand, as a human being who lives in this country, that my country and my judicial system could see a person who was ill and refuse him to be released, either to go abroad for treatment or to be given bail to leave jail, to be able to access doctors and hospitals that had the capacity to handle his case. But today is not a case for quarrels and recriminations over the injustices that were committed against this great man. It's a day for us to give testimony to his life. I met Bob in 1992 when we were both teenagers in a school debate where we were rivals. But even upon meeting, the people who knew me and the people who knew him already felt that we would become instant friends, and we became instant friends upon meeting. Because Bob had a magnetic personality. He was a rigorous debater, a vigorous debater, a rigorous intellectual, well-read, articulate, intelligent, intellectual. And we formed a very strong union that has lasted the last 29 years. During this time, I was able to learn the kindness of his heart and the generosity of his spirit. each one of you who is in this church, I am sure you've been touched by Bob. When Bob was doing well, I always did well, and his friends did well. I cannot remember a single event. If Bob had something and you went to him and he didn't give it, and if Bob gave you money, he never asked for it back. It was up to your conscience to remember and pay back. When Bob was in jail, I used to visit him almost every weekend whenever I was in the country, because before COVID I used to travel a lot, and during COVID we couldn't visit him in hospital. I was impressed by the strength of his character, by the integrity of his personality, because in that jail, Bob faced heavy odds. He had a medical condition that required expensive treatment, but actually required treatment outside of that hospital. But Bob never complained about his medical condition. Bob had been pilloried by a very biased and professional press. He rarely complained about it. Bob had been forgotten by many of his friends, whom he had done so much for. He never complained about it. Each time I went to that hospital, Bob told me about the problems of the small man in that one. Rather, each time I went to the prison, he told me about the problems of the forgotten people in the midst of prison. Those who had family problems, those who had sickness, illnesses of one form or another, those who had been unfairly and unjustly either convicted or remanded in that prison. Throughout his time, there's a young man here called Charles Kanki, is the general manager of the Independent. Whenever we went there, we raised the money. He was permanently photocopying documents, writing pleas, appeals for prisoners, and doing all this for free. He was a lecturer in that hospital, rather in that prison, where he taught law and helped students graduate in law. Even people even the prison warders who used to take care of him there, Bob helped them if they needed money. He contacted us, his friends, perhaps to help them. If they needed advice, if they needed a connection, he was always there. His time in jail was not wasted because Bob employed that time to serve humanity. Within the first 2 months of him, within the first 2 months of Bob going to jail, he helped more than 50 prisoners get their freedom, be released, because either he was able to unpack the problems of their case or help them write an appeal. There are so many prisoners, we cannot bring all of them here to give testimony, but men are seated here who helped write their appeals, and then their sentences were either reduced or their cases were dismissed or they were acquitted. This great man was sent to jail for 16 years because the government of Uganda, through its own legal processes and procedures, paid money to his law firm for pensioners. And the pensioners came to court and testified that they got all their money, and what was paid to his law firm, he had agreed with them were his legal fees. That notwithstanding, Bob was sent to prison for 16 years. I hope that there is a family who were accused in the shows there, who were accused of killing their father. And when they were accused of killing their father, they had no money for legal representation. The president was personally involved in the case, the one who ordered the arrest. Bob entered that case, went to Baran and stayed there for 2 months, represented that family. After a grueling trial, they were acquitted. I don't know whether the members of that family are here. You come please here and give testimony. They had never seen any lawyer commit his entire life to salvaging them from what was a disaster. I was also told by a legal friend of mine, Bob was such a brilliant lawyer that one of my legal friends represented a client and they won. After they won in court, my friend, this lawyer, I don't want to mention him now because it was a private conversation, he went and looked through the case and said, this case, the judge has made a mistake. On appeal, Bob is going to defeat us. He convinced his client, who had won in court, go and settle with Bob's clients out of court because you will not survive appeal. That is how brilliant he was. Thank you so much for coming to celebrate the life of this great man.
Thank you. Clergy, mourners, I think it's difficult to speak after Andrew, but Andrew has said so much that is thought about every day. But Bob's life has been
quite interesting. The conversations we were having with NICE 2 weeks ago, and the conversations we were having on Saturday, and the conversation that happened at 9, just tells us how fickle life is. What the plans we had 2 weeks ago, what we were planning to do, what we were doing 2 weeks ago, and the next phone call on Saturday is telling me your friend is not well. And then the next phone call, a few hours later, your friend is dead. Tells us how simple and fickle this life is. So, as we sit here today, we must remember that as we plan, God has different plans. Bob was in the class of 1993-96 in Makerere, and in LDC 1997. Bob was brilliant. People have written about Bob in so many different ways. And I think many of them just say he's brilliant. They don't even know whom they are talking about. Bob was not just brilliant. Bob was effortlessly brilliant. Bob and I think Julius Musoke were the only 2 people in our low class of 56, who shaved upper second by half a point. The rest of us were distant number away from them. And very distant because they had the shave of the upper second, and the rest of us were down in the lower seconds, far off. In LDC, Bob was in the top 5 students. Bob worked in Bitangara and Company for his clerkship. I worked in Muwenda and Company. We shared the same floor in Diamond Trust building. When Bob finished his clerkship, Bitangara and Company chose to keep him on. So Bob continued working through the last term of LDC. I also decided to continue with that path in Muwenda and Company to stay on for the last term of LDC. We kept coming from LDC, doing work and going back. When the results came back, I had failed some of my papers, and Bob had passed all of his. Now, this is the guy who effortlessly, he did all these things effortlessly and still passed. He actually helped me now study the supplementaries, because Bob was an all-rounder. Bob could do criminal law, civil law, commercial law, everything he would teach you, and very easily. Bob was a very good man, a good heart. Andrew has spoken about social media. Since Bob's passing, I have not posted a single thing on social media because I fear that I'm going to start a fight that I will not end. Because people speak of a person that they don't know. The case that he had, you don't understand it, you don't know it, you don't even know where it starts and where it ends. And for the lawyers who are here, you all understand what he went through. You understand how we do our practice. Now, for people to start judging out there, writing whatever they write without knowing, it's not only unfortunate, but it's wrong. And I will call upon those who think they can continue speaking about people without knowing who they are, to stop. You don't have to have an opinion on everything. You can let it lie. You don't know this person. Bob got married to NICE and got 3 beautiful children. Bob was devoted to his family. Totally devoted to his family. And NICE and the kids, thank you very much for being devoted to Bob. NICE, you have fought his family. If anyone wants to understand Bob's case, you need to probably go and sit with NICE and understand it from a mind of a person who has studied the case from an impartial perspective but understood it. NICE to tell me about the case more than I would understand it. And thank you very much for standing and being a very, very, very good wife. In these trying times, it's very easy for you to think of moving on, but you stood by and stayed there all through. Bob was a reserved person, but was a very jolly person. You need to understand him. And he had friends from every section of society, young, old, rich, poor, everything that you knew, and that was Bob. Bob never drank, Bob never smoked, Bob never philandered, Bob never did anything. It's actually those of us who drink, who do some of these things. Imagine that Bob is one who had the heart problem. Tells you what God's plans are different from each one of us. Bob lived a healthy life. To imagine that he died of a heart problem is simply flabbergasting, but Bob was always smart. Even after a long day's work, his his shirt was always straight and crisp. So this is the gentleman we are celebrating today. Nice and the kids, we are here, we have been here, we have never left. We can shout about all the things they shout on social media and do what, but those of us who know him are here. We are not going anywhere. We shall stay here as we have been in the last 3 years, the last 4 or 5 years that have been troubled. We shall remain here, and we shall go through whatever other trials that you have. We shall stand by you and remain with you. This morning I read the last letter Bob wrote to me, and one time when Samora will share this letter, he wrote that letter to me. But it will tell you the strength of the man who was your father. He wrote that letter from prison, but like Andrew said, he never complained. He told me what he wanted to see happen, what he believed was the right thing to do. I never complained the courts were unjust, the things were unfair. He said what he had to say, but he was a strong man. So you have to be strong. Life is not easy. You're 19, you're a man now, so you have to take the life in a stride. You have all of us. You know where we are. You can find us anytime. For those of us who knew your father, we can tell you with no fear of contradiction that he was a good man. He was a great man. He was a brilliant man. And let no one tell you anything different. Don't listen to these things that they write and you think that thing. And the media people, you need to get, that's a story for another day. But let's get things right. If you don't know, you don't have to write about it. If you know, write about what you know. At least ask, at the very least. But that's your father. Bob Aldrich, may your soul rest in eternal peace till we meet again.
Thank you, KK, representing your colleagues and the entire legal fraternity. Thank you so much for staying within time. Well, we overshot our time by over